Welcome, dear listener. I'm truly glad you've chosen to spend this time here tonight. Perhaps you're resting after a long day, or maybe you've been reading, studying, or simply scrolling through the quiet of the evening. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I invite you to pause for a moment and let yourself be present with me. There is a story waiting, one that has traveled centuries to reach us, carrying whispers of ambition, courage, and curiosity. Now, before we continue, I should warn you this won't be anything like the movie you may have seen, with Colin Farrell's golden hair blowing dramatically in the wind, or Angelina Jolie trying to convince the world that she was Macedonian. No, tonight there will be no heavy accents or scenes too restless for bedtime. This is not the cinema's Alexander, meant to dazzle and exhaust. This is the quiet Alexander, the one who belongs to whispers, to candlelight, to the side of history where you can drift comfortably toward dreams. Imagine settling into a comfortable chair, or lying back with your eyes closed, letting the weight of your body melt into the surface beneath you. Feel your shoulders relax, your jaw unclench. Take a slow, deliberate breath deep enough to fill your chest, gentle enough to release tension. This is the moment we will share, a quiet passage through history. History often seems loud, dramatic, full of armies, empires, and battles that reshape the world. Yet for every epic story, there are countless small, human moments that escape the annals of time. Alexander the Great, for all his legendary conquests, likely faced the ordinary concerns we all know: choosing the right horse, calming a stubborn mule, deciding whether to speak or listen, worrying about friends and family. Even the mightiest can be tender. Even the boldest pause for thought. Tonight, we will wander together through his life, step by step, as if walking along a sunlit path in ancient Macedon. We'll listen to the clatter of hooves, the soft murmur of courtyards, and the distant calls of traders in a foreign market. You may picture yourself beside him, feeling the dust of distant lands, smelling the aroma of fires in a camp, or hearing the quiet rustle of scrolls in a study. Our journey will honor both the grandeur of history and the delicate rhythms of daily life. Over the next 2 hours, we will move through chapters of Alexander's existence, each moment carefully framed. From his earliest childhood days in Pella, to the lessons he received from Aristotle, to the far reaches of Asia he would one day explore, we will linger on details. The color of the sky over a battlefield, the weight of armor on a soldier's shoulders, the quiet flicker of candlelight over a map. We'll see Alexander not only as a conqueror, but as a student, a strategist, a son, and a man who, despite his ambition, carried doubts and wondered at the world he was shaping. His victories, his losses, and even his most ordinary moments will be given space to breathe, so that we can understand him, not just as a figure of legend, but as a human being. Let yourself sink deeper into this time and place. Feel the cool of the early morning in Macedon. Hear the laughter of children running through the palace gardens, and sense the quiet anticipation of a boy who dreams of a world larger than the hills around him. These moments are small, yet essential. They form the roots from which greatness will grow. Tonight, this story asks only one thing of you: to breathe, to notice, and to allow history to become a gentle companion. There is no rush, no urgency, no need to measure time. We will move together, slowly and deliberately, exploring the life of one of history's most fascinating figures. By the end, perhaps you will see Alexander not only through the lens of battles and conquest, but through his curiosity, his courage, and the quiet moments that shaped him. And perhaps, in turn, you will find reflections of your own aspirations, your own struggles, and your own quiet courage. So, take another deep breath, feel the moment. And when you are ready, let us step into the first chapter of this remarkable life, letting the story unfold like a river through time, winding gently through the hills, cities, and plains of a world long past, yet somehow still alive in our imagination. Imagine the rolling hills of Macedon stretching endlessly beneath a soft, golden sunlight where olive groves and vineyards ripple in the gentle morning breeze, and the distant mountains stand like silent sentinels guarding the valleys below. In these hills, the city of Pella, the capital of a kingdom small in size but vast in ambition, buzzed with life even in the earliest hours of the day. Merchants wheeled carts along cobblestone streets, their wares clattering with the rhythm of commerce, while children darted between houses and courtyards, their laughter mingling with the distant neigh of horses and the bleating of goats. The aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from ovens in humble homes, mingling with the faint scent of incense from temples. Amidst this lively tapestry, a young boy moved with a quiet intensity that set him apart. Alexander, who watched everything with piercing curiosity, absorbing the details of the world with an alertness far beyond his years. The way shadows played across palace walls, the meticulous drills of soldiers in the courtyard, the subtle gestures of advisors in conversation, none escaped his notice. Even as he played, he was learning, cataloging, observing, and imagining the threads that connected people, power and destiny in ways few could perceive. Alexander was born in 356 BCE in the grand palace of Pella, a city that hummed with the energy of both politics and culture. His father, Philip II, had transformed Macedon from a collection of warring tribes into a unified kingdom with ambitions that reached far beyond its borders. Philip was a brilliant strategist, a man who understood both the art of war and the delicate balance of diplomacy, often negotiating alliances and marriages to secure the stability of his realm. Alexander's mother, Olympias, came from the royal house of Epirus and was equally formidable in intellect, religious devotion, and ambition. She believed deeply in the power of destiny and prophecy, interpreting the solar eclipse that coincided with Alexander's birth as a signal that her son's life would be extraordinary, a mixture of triumph and challenge. From the earliest days, Alexander was immersed in a world where celestial signs, political maneuvers, and family expectations intertwined. Olympias, fiercely protective and endlessly ambitious for her son, nurtured not only his body and mind, but also a profound awareness of his future role, using stories, rituals, and personal guidance to instill in him both confidence and reverence for the forces shaping his life. Even as an infant and toddler, Alexander's life was marked by contrasts between the splendor of royalty and the rigorous discipline expected of a prince. The palace of Pella was a labyrinth of marble halls, sunlit courtyards, and lush gardens, designed to impress visitors and reflect Macedon's growing power. But within these opulent spaces, young Alexander learned the subtleties of observation and perception. He watched his father conduct meetings with generals and diplomats, noticing the careful balance between authority and persuasion, the weight of gestures, the timing of speech, and the strategic use of silence. Even a casual stroll through the palace corridors offered lessons in etiquette, power, and human behavior. How servants anticipated needs without being asked, how soldiers trained with precise discipline, and how advisors sometimes disguised personal ambition behind words of loyalty. Olympias guided him through these observations, turning each moment into instruction, subtly teaching him to discern character, to anticipate intentions, and to cultivate patience and wisdom alongside courage. In these quiet, formative days, Alexander began developing a perceptiveness that would later become one of his most important tools as a leader. As Alexander grew older, his formal education expanded to include the structured teachings of Greek tutors, who introduced him to reading, writing, music, poetry, and the fundamentals of mathematics and natural science. Yet his learning was never confined to these lessons alone. Homer's Iliad became a central influence. Alexander memorized passages, debated the ethics of Achilles' choices, and analyzed the strategies employed in the epic battles of Troy. He began to connect the stories of heroes with the practical observations he gathered in the palace and city streets, developing an early sense of how ideals and strategy could intersect. Beyond literature, he observed Philip training the army, learning the importance of formations, logistics, and the careful planning required to win battles without unnecessary loss. Alexander internalized these lessons, linking the abstract with the concrete. Philosophy informed strategy, poetry inspired courage, and history offered insight into human behavior. Each scroll he read and each drill he observed strengthened both mind and spirit, nurturing a boy whose curiosity and capacity for synthesis were already exceptional. Physical education was inseparable from intellectual and moral development in Alexander's upbringing. From the earliest age, he rode horses, learning to read an animal's temperament, maintain balance, and assert gentle authority, all skills that would later translate into leadership over men. The story of Bucephalus, the horse feared by all but tamed by Alexander, demonstrates not only his courage, but also his insight into psychology, patience, and observation. Wrestling, archery, and mock battles filled his days with challenges that tested endurance, strength, agility, and tactical thinking. These activities were rarely casual. Every contest was a lesson in perseverance, judgment, and the responsibility of command. He learned to anticipate moves, motivate peers, and adapt to unforeseen circumstances. In tandem with the moral and intellectual guidance of his parents and tutors, these physical exercises began forging a leader capable of balancing decisiveness with empathy, strategy with imagination, and authority with respect, qualities that would define him in the campaigns to come. The dynamics within Alexander's family were intricate and profoundly influential on his emerging character. Olympias' intensity and spiritual devotion often contrasted sharply with Philip's pragmatic and sometimes harsh methods of teaching power and politics. Alexander learned to navigate this duality with keen perception, absorbing lessons from both sides. From his mother, he gained a sense of destiny, symbolism, and emotional intelligence, learning to anticipate motives and interpret signs. From his father, he acquired practical skills in negotiation, strategy, and governance, understanding that leadership required both vision and meticulous attention to detail. These contrasting influences taught Alexander to balance ambition with caution, empathy with authority, and moral judgment with strategic necessity, creating a foundation for a ruler who could inspire loyalty while maintaining control over complex social and military hierarchies. Even play became a tool for learning. Alexander engaged in games of strategy and mock battles with peers, exercises that were at once playful and deeply instructive. Each contest required him to anticipate the actions of others, make rapid decisions, and manage alliances, fostering skills in negotiation, tactical thinking, and leadership. His curiosity often led him to question rules, debate with teachers, and experiment with approaches that stretched conventional thinking. These experiences reinforced lessons from formal education, teaching him how to synthesize knowledge, adapt to changing circumstances, and exercise judgment in real time. Through games and structured challenges, Alexander cultivated confidence, ingenuity, and a sense of responsibility that extended beyond personal success, showing him the value of foresight, collaboration, and ethical decision-making. Alexander's curiosity extended beyond the palace walls into the bustling streets, markets, and surrounding countryside of Pella. He watched artisans crafting pottery and jewelry, listened to the negotiations of merchants in various tongues, and observed travelers recounting distant lands. Every detail, whether the patterns of dress, the cadence of speech, or the customs displayed in public, was absorbed into his growing mental map of the world. These excursions gave him early lessons in cultural diversity, adaptability, and observation. Even small encounters, such as noticing how a merchant placated an unhappy customer, or how a soldier responded to an unexpected order, contributed to his understanding of human behavior, preparing him to navigate the complex social structures and multicultural armies he would command in the future. Religion and ritual were woven into every aspect of Alexander's upbringing, forming both his worldview and moral compass. From a young age, he participated in royal ceremonies, learned to interpret omens, and consulted with priests, blending spiritual awareness with pragmatic reasoning. Olympius encouraged him to see signs and prophecies not merely as superstition, but as reflections of character, opportunity, and consequence, teaching him to align personal action with perceived cosmic patterns. This spiritual education intersected with intellectual, physical, and social lessons, fostering a mind capable of reflection, foresight, and nuanced understanding of human motivation. Such awareness of the sacred and the symbolic would later guide him in decisions of war, diplomacy, and governance, where perception often shaped realities as powerfully as action itself. By his early teens, Alexander had begun to demonstrate leadership among his peers. He organized contests, mediated disputes, and inspired loyalty through both example and guidance. Tutors and court observers noted a rare combination of charisma, intelligence, and decisiveness, suggesting that Alexander was developing the qualities necessary to command both respect and action. His interactions with peers, whether through structured challenges or everyday conversations, became opportunities to refine judgment, practice negotiation, and understand social dynamics. Even seemingly ordinary moments, sharing a meal, resolving a disagreement, or observing a servant's diligence, were lessons in empathy, ethics, and influence, reinforcing his ability to perceive the needs and motivations of others, a skill critical to leadership at any scale. As childhood gradually gave way to adolescence, Alexander stood on the cusp of a transformative chapter. Recognizing his son's extraordinary potential, King Philip arranged for Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of the ancient world, to become Alexander's tutor. Aristotle's mentorship promised not only the acquisition of knowledge, but the expansion of the young prince's intellectual and moral horizons, fostering critical reasoning, curiosity about distant lands, and understanding of the natural and political world. Even before this formal mentorship began, Alexander's experiences, the palace lessons, the observation of people, the physical training, the games, the exploration of Pella, and the spiritual education imparted by his mother, had already cultivated a mind prepared for greatness. In these formative years, the boy who ran through the sunlit hills of Macedon was quietly learning courage, insight, empathy, and strategic thinking, laying the foundation for a life that would later stretch across continents, cultures, and centuries, leaving a legacy that would echo far beyond his own time. In the serene courtyards of the Macedonian palace, sunlight spilled over marble floors, glinting off carefully carved statues, while the subtle scent of jasmine and rosemary mingled with the earthy aroma of the nearby gardens. It was in this tranquil, almost sacred environment that a young Alexander first encountered Aristotle, a man whose reputation as a philosopher, scientist, and teacher preceded him across the Greek world. Aristotle's presence transformed the palace into a realm of quiet inquiry and disciplined study. Scrolls were unfurled on stone benches, and ink-stained hands traced letters that carried centuries of accumulated knowledge. The philosopher did not merely teach. He cultivated thought, asking questions designed to awaken curiosity, provoke reflection, and expand perception. Alexander, already precociously observant and restless, found himself immersed in a dialogue that stretched the boundaries of his understanding. He learned that knowledge was not simply a collection of facts, but a living process, a lens through which to interpret human behavior, natural phenomena, and the intricate machinery of politics and power. Each lesson was a subtle invitation to think beyond Macedon, to imagine possibilities, and to engage with the wider, unknown world beyond the familiar hills of his homeland. Aristotle's lessons were vast, encompassing not only philosophy, but also ethics, science, literature, and politics. Alexander studied ethics through the lens of human action, considering not only what was effective, but also what was just, moral, and sustainable. The philosopher taught him to weigh virtue against ambition, to recognize the consequences of choices, and to understand that leadership required a delicate balance between force and wisdom. In politics, Alexander examined the histories of Athens, Sparta, and other city-states, learning to analyze how leadership styles, cultural norms, and civic structures influenced the success or failure of rulers. He considered the outcomes of wars, alliances, and betrayals, noting not only the tactical decisions, but the human motivations that drove them. Science, too, became a living pursuit. Aristotle encouraged Alexander to observe animals in their natural habitats, catalog plants, measure rivers, and contemplate the order and patterns of the natural world. Poetry and literature were studied analytically, offering insight into human emotion, social values, and the enduring power of narrative. Alexander was learning to synthesize multiple streams of knowledge, to see the connections between abstract thought and practical action, and to cultivate a mind capable of both imagination and disciplined reasoning. The classroom extended far beyond the palace walls, spilling into the open air where nature itself became a teacher. Aristotle often led Alexander on long walks through Macedon's valleys, across its rivers, and into forests thick with olive, oak, and cypress trees. Each excursion was carefully orchestrated to teach observation, patience, and analytical reasoning. Alexander learned to catalog animals, noting their behaviors, feeding patterns, and interactions, while the philosopher explained the principles underlying each ecosystem. He studied the flow of rivers, the composition of soil, and the patterns of seasons, understanding that the natural world operated according to laws that could be observed, interpreted, and applied to human affairs. The young prince was encouraged to ask questions at every step. Why a river bends in a certain way? Why birds migrate? Why a plant flourishes in one soil but fails in another, connecting empirical observation with philosophical thought. These experiences cultivated in him a keen awareness of complexity, interdependence, and cause and effect relationships, skills that would later help him evaluate terrain, supply lines, and strategic opportunities during his campaigns. Beyond intellectual training, these walks nurtured a profound appreciation for beauty, rhythm, and harmony in the world, reinforcing the idea that knowledge was inseparable from curiosity and attentiveness to life in all its forms. Alexander's engagement with Aristotle was dynamic and relentless, marked by questions, debates, and challenges that tested both his teacher and himself. He would often press for clarifications, demand examples, and propose alternative scenarios, reflecting an impatience that was driven not by obstinacy, but by an insatiable desire to understand deeply. Aristotle responded by stretching the limits of conventional thinking, presenting complex problems, paradoxes, and ethical dilemmas that required Alexander to weigh consequences, consider multiple perspectives, and articulate reasoned conclusions. These dialogues cultivated critical thinking, mental flexibility, and intellectual resilience, transforming lessons into active experiences of discovery. Through repeated engagement, Alexander honed his capacity to synthesize knowledge, bridging abstract concepts with practical applications. He began to perceive that wisdom lay not in memorization, but in the ability to connect ideas, anticipate outcomes, and adapt understanding to changing circumstances. This method of learning, a blend of curiosity, challenge, and reflection, became a defining feature of his approach to leadership, strategy, and problem-solving. Ethical reasoning became a cornerstone of Alexander's education under Aristotle. The young prince grappled with questions of justice, virtue, and the responsibilities of a ruler to those he governed. Aristotle encouraged him to analyze historical examples, leaders of Greek city-states, generals, and kings, examining how moral choices, ambition, and practical necessity intersected. Alexander reflected on the tension between personal desire and the welfare of the state, learning that true leadership required balancing courage with prudence, power with empathy, and action with reflection. These lessons were reinforced through observation of Philip's interactions with Macedonian officials, foreign envoys, and military commanders, where Alexander witnessed firsthand the delicate negotiation between authority, diplomacy, and moral responsibility. By considering both theoretical principles and lived experiences, he began to internalize a philosophy of leadership that combined ethical awareness with strategic thinking, laying the groundwork for decisions that would later influence not only military outcomes, but also the integration of diverse cultures, governance structures, and societies under his rule. Practical skills were seamlessly integrated into Alexander's intellectual education, ensuring that his mind was complemented by the capacity to act decisively and communicate effectively. Aristotle guided him in the study of rhetoric, logic, and persuasive speech, teaching the young prince how to construct arguments, appeal to reason and emotion, and convey authority with clarity. Alexander practiced debating with tutors and peers, often simulating scenarios in which he had to defend policies, persuade allies, or negotiate delicate disputes. These exercises were not merely academic. They cultivated skills he would later apply to inspire loyalty among his troops, negotiate with foreign leaders, and navigate the complex social and political landscapes of his future empire. Through these lessons, he learned to anticipate the responses of others, to structure ideas strategically, and to adapt his communication style to different audiences, a foundation for leadership that combined intellect, charisma, and practical wisdom. Alexander's studies of politics and history provided a detailed understanding of the mechanics of power and the successes and failures of rulers before him. Aristotle introduced him to the intricate histories of Greek city-states, from the democracy of Athens to the militarism of Sparta, analyzing their governance structures, strategic decisions, and internal challenges. Alexander studied examples of diplomacy, alliances, betrayals, and military campaigns, paying attention not only to tactical outcomes, but also to the human decisions that shaped them. He began to recognize patterns in leadership, how pride, ambition, prudence, and foresight could determine the rise or fall of states, and developed a nuanced understanding of political dynamics. These lessons encouraged him to evaluate risk, anticipate consequences, and consider long-term stability alongside immediate gains. Alexander internalized the notion that effective leadership required not only strength and strategy, but also moral discernment, insight into human motivations, and the ability to inspire trust and loyalty across diverse populations. Alexander's fascination with the natural world deepened under Aristotle's guidance, fostering both empirical observation and analytical reasoning. He meticulously recorded the behaviors of animals, noting survival strategies, social hierarchies, and interactions with the environment. Plants were studied for their medicinal, nutritional, and structural properties, and Alexander learned to understand the principles of cause and effect, growth, and adaptation. Even the study of celestial phenomena was incorporated, linking observation of the stars with philosophical reflection on the nature of life, destiny, and the universe. These exercises trained him to perceive patterns, make inferences, and think systematically, skills that would later enhance his strategic planning, reconnaissance, and decision-making in unfamiliar territories. Moreover, this immersion in scientific inquiry nurtured a mindset that valued evidence, observation, and critical thinking, blending intellectual curiosity with practical application in ways that would characterize his leadership and approach to complex challenges. Cultural awareness became a vital part of Alexander's education. Aristotle introduced him to the myths, traditions, and political systems of neighboring Greek city-states, encouraging comparisons with Macedonian customs. Alexander absorbed these lessons with keen observation, noting how language, religion, law, and social norms shaped behavior and influenced political stability. He reflected on differences and similarities, learning to approach unfamiliar cultures with curiosity and respect rather than prejudice. This early exposure to diversity planted the seeds of his later policies, in which conquered peoples were often integrated into his administration, their customs respected, and their talents utilized. Alexander began to understand that the strength of an empire depended not solely on military conquest, but also on the capacity to unite and inspire people of varying backgrounds under a shared vision, balancing power with diplomacy and cultural sensitivity. Even in moments of solitude, Alexander's mind remained active, blending lessons from Aristotle with reflections on his own experiences and observations. He would wander through palace gardens, watching sunlight filter through olive trees, listening to the distant hum of the marketplace, or observing the behaviors of animals in their natural environment. In these quiet hours, he synthesized knowledge from philosophy, science, history, and politics, forming a mental framework that combined imagination, ethical reasoning, and strategic insight. These reflections helped him develop foresight and self-awareness, allowing him to anticipate challenges, evaluate consequences, and prepare for complex situations. Alexander's contemplative nature, nurtured through hours of thoughtful study and observation, became as important a tool as his physical training, sharpening a mind capable of vision, calculation, and leadership at an extraordinary scale. By the end of his years under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander had cultivated a remarkable integration of intellectual rigor, ethical understanding, and practical skill. He was not only knowledgeable, but also reflective, curious, and capable of discerning subtle patterns in human behavior, politics, and the natural world. Every lesson, excursion, and dialogue had contributed to a mind prepared for both leadership and exploration, blending imagination with strategy, moral awareness with ambition, and observation with action. As he approached adolescence, Alexander stood ready to transition from the halls of learning to the broader world, carrying the lessons of Aristotle with him. These formative years had instilled a foundation that would support his extraordinary campaigns, guiding him not only in conquest, but also in governance, cultural integration, and the creation of a lasting legacy. In this way, the education he received became the quiet engine of his ambition, a compass that would steer him across continents, through battles and negotiations, and into the pages of history. At dawn, the camp stirred with a gentle rhythm, the sounds of preparation weaving into the soft light of morning. The clatter of armor and the muted footsteps of soldiers created a quiet symphony, punctuated by the distant calls of animals and the rustle of tents in the breeze. Alexander, now a young leader stepping beyond the familiar hills of Macedon, mounted his horse with a composed yet attentive demeanor. From his vantage point, he could see the careful alignment of infantry, the disciplined arrangement of cavalry, and the orderly placement of supply wagons, each element forming a living network of human and material resources. Though young, he understood that the success of the coming campaign depended on this precise orchestration, on the cohesion of men and beasts alike, and on the subtle interplay of morale, discipline, and readiness. He inhaled the crisp morning air, carrying the sense of damp earth and fresh grass, and allowed himself a moment to observe the quiet determination etched on the faces of his soldiers, recognizing in their anticipation and anxiety a reflection of his own. The initial campaigns tested Alexander's emergent abilities as both a strategist and a commander, pushing him to translate the knowledge and insight gained from years of study into decisive action. He moved first against Macedonia's neighboring regions, securing borders and stabilizing internal politics, before gradually directing his attention toward the complex and often fractious city-states of Greece. Alexander approached each engagement with careful observation, studying not only the terrain, but also the character and disposition of those he would encounter. He considered how hills, rivers, and wooded areas could serve as both obstacles and advantages, and he noted the subtle behaviors of local populations, weighing how they might respond to the presence of a foreign army. Even before battle commenced, Much of his effort was invested in preparation, organizing supply lines, assigning responsibilities to trusted officers, establishing communication signals, and ensuring that each unit was both trained and motivated. This meticulous attention to detail reflected the lessons of his youth, a blending of intellectual discipline with practical, hands-on understanding of leadership. Alexander's personal charisma began to manifest as a critical force within the army, influencing morale and loyalty in ways that went far beyond formal command. He did not remain distant or merely symbolic. He engaged with his soldiers, listening attentively to their concerns, encouraging initiative, and demonstrating his own courage alongside them. Whether riding through a unit to inspect readiness or sharing in the arduous routines of long marches, he created bonds of respect and trust, fostering a sense of shared purpose that transformed ordinary soldiers into a cohesive, motivated force. His presence alone served as both reassurance and inspiration, and these subtle, human connections were as decisive as any strategy or weapon in maintaining the discipline and morale necessary for sustained campaigns. Through these early experiences, Alexander began to understand that leadership was an intricate balance of authority, empathy, example, and psychological insight, lessons that would underpin his ability to command and inspire men across continents. Each engagement brought new lessons in strategy and adaptation. Alexander carefully studied the formations, movements, and tactics of his adversaries, analyzing how phalanx lines, cavalry maneuvers, and fortifications could be anticipated or exploited. He experimented with the coordination of different units, testing flexible arrangements and observing the effects of timing, terrain, and morale. Even minor skirmishes offered insight into human behavior, the hesitation of a commander, the fatigue of troops, the subtle cues of fear or confidence, and Alexander recorded these observations in his mind, as if mapping not just the battlefield, but the psychology of those involved. Through these experiences, he began to recognize that victory depended not solely on courage or strength, but on the precise integration of intelligence, preparation, and the ability to anticipate the unpredictable. Each challenge strengthened his capacity to think holistically, to evaluate both tangible and intangible factors, and to adjust strategies with remarkable speed and insight. The logistics of warfare required constant vigilance and meticulous planning. Alexander supervised the movement of supplies, ensuring that food, water, and equipment reached soldiers and animals alike across varied and often unforgiving terrain. He negotiated with local populations for provisions, assessed the sustainability of supply lines, and considered the impact of weather, rivers, and roads on the pace of the army. Beyond physical necessities, he was acutely aware of the morale and psychological state of his men, adjusting routines, assigning tasks, and providing encouragement to maintain cohesion and determination. This balance of practical administration and human insight was a continuous exercise, and Alexander's growing attentiveness revealed the importance of foresight, preparation, and care in sustaining an army over long campaigns. The lessons learned here, though often invisible in historical records, would prove essential in his later, more ambitious conquests. Even amid the rigors of campaigning, Alexander carved out moments of reflection and observation. He would pause to watch the first light of day illuminate distant hills, listen to the wind rustling through olive groves, or observe the disciplined movements of soldiers during drills. These quiet intervals were not mere respite, but opportunities for contemplation, allowing him to synthesize experience, assess progress, and anticipate the next steps. In these reflective moments, he considered the human, environmental, and strategic dimensions of each decision, merging insight with intuition. This integration of observation and thought nurtured a leadership style that combined calculated strategy with imaginative foresight, balancing the demands of conquest with careful attention to detail, the well-being of his men, and the subtle currents of human behavior. Battles themselves were complex orchestrations of timing, coordination, and human psychology. Alexander learned to combine infantry, cavalry, and archers in movements that required not only precise planning, but also rapid adaptation to unfolding circumstances. He observed the behavior of enemy troops, noting hesitation, overconfidence, or fatigue, and adjusted his tactics in real time. Each engagement demanded both decisiveness and patience, requiring him to weigh risks, interpret signals from allies and adversaries, and maintain clarity under pressure. Victory was never taken for granted. It emerged from a careful synthesis of observation, intuition, preparation, and the morale and cohesion of his forces. In this way, even young, he began to grasp the delicate balance between strategy and human dynamics that would define his later campaigns. Alexander's attention to the psychological dimension of leadership grew alongside his tactical skill. He understood that courage, fear, and loyalty could shape outcomes as profoundly as any sword or phalanx formation. Through gestures, words, and example, he reinforced confidence and determination among his soldiers. At times, a brief conversation, a reassuring presence on the field, or a shared hardship on the march was as crucial to success as any formal plan. This awareness of human motivation and morale, combined with his emerging tactical genius, allowed him to inspire loyalty and resilience in men who faced immense danger, forging a bond between leader and troops that would endure across continents and campaigns. As Alexander advanced, he began to integrate diplomacy with military action, recognizing that conquest was as much about governance as it was about battle. Cities, local governments, and populations were carefully assessed. He noted customs, trade practices, and social hierarchies, understanding how best to consolidate control without provoking unnecessary resistance. Negotiation, alliance building, and strategic leniency became tools alongside force, reflecting a sophisticated approach that combined respect for local traditions with the assertion of authority. These early experiences revealed the importance of flexibility and cultural awareness, preparing him to govern diverse populations and integrate conquered territories into a cohesive empire, lessons that would shape the far-reaching policies of his later campaigns. Even as victories accumulated, Alexander remained deeply reflective, considering not only the immediate tactical gains, but also their broader implications. He observed the rhythm of daily life in camp, the quiet moments between marches, the careful maintenance of weapons and armor, the subtle interactions among soldiers, and used these observations to refine his leadership. He contemplated the morale, loyalty, and fatigue of his men, integrating these human factors into his planning and decision-making. At the same time, he imagined the wider world beyond Macedonia, pondering distant lands and cultures he had yet to encounter. These reflections combined practical experience with imaginative foresight, fostering a leadership style that balanced ambition with empathy, action with deliberation, and the tangible with the conceptual. As Alexander advanced through Greece, he navigated a complex network of alliances, rivalries, and political dynamics. Each city-state presented a unique challenge. Some welcomed him as a liberator, others resisted as an intruder. He negotiated with leaders, observed local customs, and carefully assessed the attitudes of populations, learning how to wield diplomacy alongside force. These interactions taught him that conquest was as much about understanding human behavior and political nuance as it was about battlefield success. Through these experiences, Alexander honed his ability to inspire loyalty, anticipate reactions, and manage the delicate balance between authority and persuasion, a skill set that would prove invaluable as he extended his ambitions toward Persia. The logistics and preparation behind his campaigns demanded constant attention and foresight. Alexander oversaw the movement of supplies, the management of troop rotations, and the coordination of communication across long distances. He accounted for the challenges posed by terrain, weather, and infrastructure, ensuring that his army remained effective, well-fed, and organized. Beyond the practical necessities, He remained attuned to the psychological state of his soldiers, adjusting routines and responsibilities to sustain morale and cohesion. These lessons reinforced a crucial insight that leadership required meticulous planning, careful observation, and the ability to balance human needs with strategic objectives. This awareness, cultivated through early victories and reflective thought, laid the groundwork for the even more ambitious campaigns that lay ahead, as Alexander prepared to confront the vast empire of Persia. Alexander's growing sense of ambition intertwined with careful observation and reflection. He considered not only the immediate gains of each conquest, but also their long-term implications for governance, cultural integration, and the spread of influence. Every march, every skirmish, and every negotiation added layers of understanding, shaping a young leader capable of combining tactical insight with strategic foresight. He began to visualize maps that stretched beyond Macedonia, contemplating territories he had not yet seen and imagining how diverse peoples, landscapes, and resources might be brought together under a coherent vision. These reflections were grounded in experience, but fueled by curiosity, imagination, and the analytical habits nurtured under Aristotle's guidance. Even as he achieved victories, Alexander remained conscious of the limits of his power and the fragility of human endeavor. He carefully considered the loyalty of his generals, the endurance of his troops, and the challenges posed by unfamiliar lands. Each decision required balancing immediate tactical needs with longer-term strategic goals, combining courage with prudence and ambition with humility. Through this awareness, he honed the qualities that would distinguish him as a leader: decisiveness tempered by reflection, confidence guided by observation, and boldness supported by preparation. These early campaigns became a crucible, forging both skill and character that would carry him across continents in the years to come. As the first steps of conquest concluded, Alexander stood poised to embark on campaigns that would take him far beyond familiar horizons. Macedonia and Greece were now secure, providing a foundation for more ambitious endeavors. With lessons learned from early battles, diplomatic engagements, and logistical challenges, he prepared to turn his gaze eastward toward the vast and formidable empire of Persia. The stage was set for a journey that would test his intellect, courage, and vision on an unprecedented scale. Reflective yet resolute, Alexander was ready to step into a wider world, carrying both experience and imagination, and the promise of a legacy that would echo through history. Imagine vast plains stretching endlessly under a sun that seemed to scorch every horizon, deserts shimmering with heat, and rivers winding like silver threads through lands unknown. Alexander's army moved as a living current across these territories, a long line of soldiers, horses, and supply wagons carrying not only the ambitions of a young king, but also the hopes, fears, and resilience of thousands of men. Each morning brought new landscapes, new challenges, and new opportunities to observe the world in all its complexity. Dust rose from marching feet, mingling with the scent of leather, metal, and sweat. And Alexander, ever attentive, took note of how terrain, weather, and local conditions could influence both movement and strategy. These journeys were more than marches. They were lessons in geography, human endurance, and the subtle interplay between environment and action. Persia presented a civilization unlike any Alexander had known, vast and sophisticated, with cities that boasted towering walls, intricate marketplaces, and bustling trade routes stretching across mountains and rivers. The richness of culture, the diversity of peoples, and the complexity of governance impressed him deeply. He studied the organization of cities, noting how fortifications, roads, and supply networks could support or hinder both resistance and administration. Markets were alive with spices, textiles, and ideas. Voices in multiple languages echoed through narrow streets, offering insights into local customs, beliefs, and power structures. Every encounter demanded careful observation, diplomacy, and cultural sensitivity, as Alexander sought not only to conquer, but to understand the societies he entered. Alexander's military engagements in Persia were lessons in strategy, innovation, and leadership. Battles were meticulously planned, integrating infantry, cavalry, and archers in formations adapted to terrain and enemy disposition. He analyzed Persian tactics, learned from setbacks, and adjusted his strategies to exploit weaknesses while minimizing casualties. Coordination of diverse units, timing of maneuvers, and rapid decision-making became essential skills. Yet, alongside the intensity of battle, there were moments of quiet reflection, observing the movement of clouds across plains, listening to the murmur of rivers, or noting the patterns of local wildlife. These pauses allowed Alexander to merge practical experience with contemplation, sharpening his mind for the complex challenges that lay ahead. The human dimension of conquest became increasingly evident. Alexander took note of morale, loyalty, and motivation, understanding that the cohesion of his army and the behavior of his opponents were as decisive as terrain or weapons. He built personal connections with commanders, treated soldiers with attention and fairness, and observed the reactions of civilians to his presence. These observations informed decisions that combined strategy with empathy, action with prudence. Alexander's ability to read people, anticipate reactions, and inspire loyalty became as critical to success as his tactical brilliance. Diplomacy intertwined with conquest at every stage. Alexander learned to negotiate with local leaders, respect certain customs, and incorporate talented individuals from conquered territories into administration and military units. He observed how cultures adapted, blended, or resisted, and how alliances could be leveraged for stability and further expansion. These interactions were subtle, requiring patience, observation, and careful communication. By blending force with diplomacy, Alexander began to construct not merely a conquered land, but an integrated, functioning empire, laying the groundwork for policies that would endure far beyond his campaigns. Even amid the rigors of marching, supplying, and fighting, Alexander remained an observer of life itself. He noted the laughter of children playing by rivers, the rhythm of market sellers, and the sense of bread baking in small ovens. These moments grounded him, reminding him of the ordinary human experiences that persisted regardless of conquest. In the midst of strategic calculations and battlefield maneuvers, Alexander's attention to these small details reflected a sensitivity to culture, humanity, and the textures of everyday life, an awareness that informed his later policies and interactions across a vast and diverse empire. As Persia gradually fell under his control, Alexander's ambitions reached further eastward, toward lands filled with mountains, rivers, and mysteries still beyond his knowledge. His campaigns were no longer mere military operations. They were journeys of discovery, blending exploration, strategy, and cultural integration. Every step forward expanded both his physical and intellectual horizons, forcing him to adapt to new climates, peoples, and logistical challenges. The lessons of Macedon and Greece discipline, observation, strategic thinking, and reflection were now applied on a continental scale, shaping a leader capable of navigating the complexities of an entire empire. Amid the intensity of campaigns, Alexander often found moments of introspection about his legacy. He considered how cities, cultures, and peoples would remember his actions, reflecting on the transient nature of power and the permanence of influence. These contemplations were quiet but profound, shaping decisions about governance, cultural integration, and the treatment of conquered populations. He began to think not only as a military leader, but also as a custodian of a vision, blending ambition with ethical consideration, force with understanding, and conquest with the potential for lasting cultural imprint. Alexander's interactions with local populations became increasingly nuanced as he moved deeper into Persia. He observed the hierarchy of cities, the customs of nobles, and the rhythms of daily life, learning how to wield authority without provoking unnecessary resistance. He incorporated local leaders into governance structures, respecting traditions while subtly guiding policy to align with his expanding empire. These early experiments in administration highlighted the balance between respect and control, showing him that the effectiveness of conquest relied as much on cultural understanding as on military success. Each city, each marketplace, each council meeting became a living classroom, teaching lessons that would inform the governance of far-reaching territories. The diversity of languages, religions, and social norms posed challenges that required both diplomacy and innovation. Alexander learned quickly that imposing uniformity was neither practical nor desirable. Instead, he fostered collaboration between Greek settlers, Macedonian officers, and local communities, encouraging the exchange of ideas, customs, and practices. This blending of cultures laid the groundwork for Hellenistic influence, allowing Greek and local traditions to coexist and enrich one another. In doing so, Alexander began to understand that leadership extended beyond command of armies. It demanded insight into human nature, patience, and the ability to integrate disparate elements into a functional and enduring whole. Even amid these administrative and diplomatic challenges, the pace of campaigning remained relentless. Alexander coordinated long marches, oversaw supply lines stretching across deserts and rivers, and maintained communication among widely dispersed units. He anticipated obstacles, harsh weather, difficult terrain, and the fatigue of soldiers, and adjusted plans accordingly. Every march, every engagement, every logistical decision was an opportunity to refine his strategic thinking, to understand the interplay between preparation, execution, and human endurance. The discipline cultivated during these early stages of conquest became essential for managing an army, operating on a scale never before attempted in history. Amidst the physical and strategic demands, Alexander found moments of reflection that grounded his understanding of leadership and ambition. He observed the quiet persistence of local life, from the flowing of rivers to the steady rhythm of markets, integrating these observations into his broader vision of governance. These pauses allowed him to consider not only the immediate goals of conquest, but also the enduring impact of his actions. He began to think about the legacy of his campaigns, how cultures might evolve under his influence, and how the memory of his leadership could shape future generations. This reflective approach, balancing ambition with insight, would become a hallmark of his leadership, guiding decisions in both war and governance across the vast territories he sought to unify. As Alexander pressed further into Persia, the scale and complexity of his operations increased dramatically. He navigated vast distances, harsh climates, and diverse populations, applying lessons learned from earlier campaigns while adapting to new challenges. The coordination of thousands of soldiers, the management of supplies across deserts and rivers, and the integration of local allies required both strategic foresight and practical ingenuity. Each decision carried consequences not only for immediate outcomes, but for the stability of newly conquered regions, reinforcing Alexander's understanding that conquest was inseparable from governance. Amid the turbulence of expansion, Alexander remained attentive to the human dimension of his campaigns. He observed the behavior of his soldiers and the reactions of local populations, noting where morale faltered or loyalty wavered. He adjusted leadership approaches, balanced discipline with encouragement, and ensured that both his Macedonian troops and allied forces felt valued and heard. These subtle interventions strengthened cohesion and resilience, allowing the army to maintain momentum across vast and often hostile territories. Alexander's growing sensitivity to the psychological and cultural factors of leadership became as decisive as any military tactic, shaping the character of his empire even before it was fully consolidated. Even in the midst of relentless marching, negotiations, and battles, Alexander often paused to reflect on the world he was shaping. He contemplated the enduring consequences of his actions, the blending of cultures, and the legacy of knowledge, trade, and governance that his campaigns might leave behind. The cities he encountered, the peoples he met, and the lands he traversed were not merely obstacles or prizes. They were teachers, offering lessons in resilience, adaptability, and the complexity of human society. With Persia gradually under his control, new horizons beckoned further east, and Alexander's mind, disciplined yet imaginative, prepared for the next stage of exploration, conquest, and cultural integration, carrying forward both experience and ambition. At night, the camp glowed softly with the flickering light of lanterns and small fires, casting long, dancing shadows over tents, armor, and march-worn gear. The aroma of cooking food mingled with the dust of the road and the faint metallic scent of weapons, forming a sensory tapestry that spoke of life on campaign. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones, recounting stories from home, fears for the future, and memories of battles just past. Alexander moved among them with quiet attentiveness, listening not only to words, but to gestures, tone, and the subtle tension in posture. These moments revealed conflicts that could destabilize even the most disciplined army, rivalries between commanders, simmering frustration among troops, and the emotional toll of prolonged separation from family and homeland. He observed carefully, realizing that leadership demanded understanding the human heart as much as commanding the battlefield, and that the strength of an army relied as much on morale, trust, and cohesion as on numbers or weapons. Challenges within the army required a careful blend of firmness, empathy, and strategic patience. Alexander mediated disputes between generals whose pride or ambition occasionally collided, negotiated solutions for soldiers' grievances, and reminded everyone of their shared purpose and honor. He recognized that even the most disciplined and loyal troops could falter if their contributions were overlooked or if personal tensions were left unchecked. By engaging directly with individuals, demonstrating awareness of their struggles, and sharing in their hardships, from long marches to harsh weather, he strengthened bonds that were vital for the cohesion and resilience of his forces. These quiet exercises of leadership, though often invisible to the historian's eye, were crucial. The silent courage of guiding and supporting men often resonated as profoundly as any battlefield triumph. Alexander's human side emerged alongside his relentless ambition, revealing a young leader capable of both reflection and decisive action. He experienced doubt, fatigue, and concern for those under his command, yet balanced these emotions with unwavering commitment to his goals. He understood that loyalty was fragile and had to be cultivated through attention, fairness, and example. Even small gestures acknowledging a soldier's skill, offering guidance to a young officer, or listening patiently to complaints, served to sustain morale and reinforce trust. In these ways, Alexander demonstrated that effective leadership was not solely about issuing orders or commanding from a distance, but about connecting with individuals, recognizing their humanity, and guiding collective effort toward shared success. Logistics, strategy, and interpersonal dynamics were deeply intertwined in Alexander's campaigns. He supervised the movement of troops and supplies with meticulous attention, ensuring that food, water, and equipment reached soldiers and animals alike across challenging terrain. Every river crossing, mountain pass, and desert march demanded careful planning, and Alexander accounted for weather, soil conditions, and the physical limits of both men and beasts. Yet logistics were only part of the equation. He simultaneously observed relationships among commanders, gauged morale, and anticipated potential conflicts before they could disrupt cohesion. This integration of practical necessity with human insight became a defining aspect of his leadership, demonstrating that successful campaigns depended as much on attentiveness to people as on battlefield strategy. Even in the midst of marching armies and tactical maneuvers, Alexander carved out moments of quiet reflection. He observed the night sky, noting constellations and the subtle shifts of the moon, listened to the wind rustling through reeds and trees, and sometimes paused to watch the distant flicker of campfires across the plain. These reflective moments allowed him to synthesize observations from the day, evaluating troop performance, planning future maneuvers, and considering the welfare of soldiers and civilians alike. By blending introspection with action, Alexander developed a leadership style that harmonized strategic thinking with empathy, foresight with sensitivity, and the urgency of immediate decisions with long-term vision. The young king also recognized the fragility of human endeavor and the unpredictability of campaigns. Storms, illness, fatigue, and unforeseen obstacles reminded him that even a disciplined, well-equipped army could falter. He approached these challenges with calm assessment, devising contingency plans and encouraging flexibility among his commanders. Alexander's ability to anticipate difficulties, adapt strategies, and maintain composure under pressure not only safeguarded the army's effectiveness, but also reinforced the confidence and trust of his soldiers. Through these lessons, he honed a leadership style that integrated meticulous planning with human understanding, preparing both himself and his army for the extraordinary trials that lay ahead as they advanced deeper into Persia and beyond. Alexander's ability to maintain cohesion extended beyond discipline to the realm of culture and shared identity. He encouraged rituals, symbols of unity, and celebrations of victories, which helped bridge differences among soldiers from diverse regions and ethnic backgrounds. These shared practices fostered a sense of belonging, mutual respect, and common purpose, strengthening the army's resilience. Soldiers learned to trust not only their commander, but also each other, forming bonds that would be crucial when facing the uncertainties and dangers of distant lands. This cultural and emotional integration became as essential to success as tactical brilliance or logistical efficiency. Even in the quietest moments, the weight of command pressed upon Alexander. He continuously evaluated morale, fatigue, and the loyalty of his men, while also considering the perceptions and reactions of local populations in newly conquered territories. Every decision, when to march, when to rest, when to negotiate, had immediate and long-term consequences. Leadership required vigilance, patience, and the ability to balance short-term operational needs with the broader goals of conquest and stability. Alexander's attentiveness to these subtle factors demonstrated that the foundation of a successful empire began with careful guidance of human hearts and minds. The challenges within the army also tested Alexander's ethical judgment and emotional resilience. He witnessed moments of fear, dissent, and moral conflict among his soldiers, forcing him to weigh discipline against compassion and strategic necessity against human cost. These experiences reinforced the understanding that leadership was not merely the execution of orders, but the ongoing negotiation of human realities, the cultivation of loyalty, and the recognition of both strengths and vulnerabilities within his ranks. Through this awareness, Alexander prepared his army for increasingly complex campaigns, shaping a force capable not only of conquest, but of enduring cohesion, adaptability, and shared purpose. Even as campaigns pressed onward, Alexander remained mindful of the small, human details that could influence the effectiveness of his army. He observed the interactions between soldiers of different regions, noting how culture, language, and background affected cohesion and morale. He encouraged shared practices, rituals, and communication that helped bridge these differences, fostering a sense of unity essential for the complex operations ahead. In doing so, he learned that leadership was as much about cultivating community and shared identity as it was about commanding movements on the battlefield. Alexander also confronted the subtle tensions between ambition and loyalty. Some generals, proud and ambitious in their own right, occasionally challenged his authority or interpreted his commands through personal lenses. Alexander navigated these dynamics with careful attention, combining firmness with persuasion, listening as much as directing, and asserting his vision while valuing the input of trusted advisors. These experiences revealed that managing human ambition within an army could be as delicate and consequential as any military strategy, and success often depended on tact, empathy, and foresight rather than sheer force. The weight of expectation extended beyond interpersonal dynamics to encompass the physical and emotional endurance of his troops. Long marches, harsh climates, and the strain of continuous engagement tested the limits of stamina and discipline. Alexander monitored the condition of men and animals, adjusted marching schedules, and ensured that logistical support minimized unnecessary hardship. He recognized that the human element was always the foundation of any army's effectiveness. Morale, trust, resilience, and courage determined whether strategy would succeed or falter. Through these lessons, he refined a leadership style that integrated tactical skill with human understanding, preparing both himself and his soldiers for the extraordinary challenges that lay ahead. Through these challenges, Alexander began to understand that true leadership required a harmony of strategy, empathy, and foresight. He observed how small conflicts could escalate if ignored, and how attentiveness, fairness, and timely intervention could transform potential disruption into strengthened loyalty. Each resolution reinforced the delicate balance of authority and respect, illustrating that the foundation of enduring conquest rested as much on human insight as on military skill. Alexander's attention to the internal dynamics of his army also nurtured resilience and adaptability. He encouraged initiative among subordinates, empowered capable officers, and allowed space for creative solutions to logistical and tactical problems. This not only enhanced operational flexibility, but also instilled a sense of shared ownership and responsibility among his men. Soldiers learned to trust not only their leader, but also each other, and this cohesion became a critical advantage as campaigns extended across unfamiliar territories and demanding landscapes. Even in the quietest moments, Alexander reflected on the lessons of these internal struggles. The loyalty of soldiers, the resolution of disputes, and the cultivation of morale were not merely tactical necessities. They were essential components of his broader vision of leadership and empire. By mastering these human dimensions, Alexander prepared himself and his army for the greater challenges to come, ready to face the vast expanses of Persia and beyond with both strategic brilliance and the steady courage born of shared experience, trust, and enduring cohesion. Dawn broke over a misty plain, the soft light revealing banners fluttering gently in the breeze and the silhouettes of soldiers preparing for the day ahead. The air carried a mix of anticipation, nervous energy, and the earthy scents of horses, leather, and damp ground, mingled with the faint aroma of campfires and the metallic tang of weapons polished in the dim light. Alexander walked deliberately among his commanders, observing the alignment of units, the posture of sentries, and the readiness of the cavalry. Each gesture, each whispered instruction, carried significance, for even a small lapse could alter the outcome of the coming engagement. Yet amidst the tension, he maintained a calm and deliberate presence, understanding that the steadiness of a leader could ripple through the ranks, inspiring confidence even before the first clash of arms. In these quiet moments, he reflected not only on strategy, but on the human element of command, recognizing that the courage, fatigue, and resolve of individual soldiers could tip the balance as surely as tactical ingenuity. Major battles became tests not only of military strategy, but of foresight, discipline, and psychological insight. Alexander meticulously studied every aspect of the terrain, from the gentle rise of hills to the shifting courses of rivers, from marshy lowlands that could impede movement to rocky ridges that could provide vantage points. He assessed the positioning, morale, and tendencies of enemy forces, while simultaneously evaluating his own troops' readiness, stamina, and cohesion. Coordinating infantry, cavalry, and archers required precise timing, continuous observation, and rapid decision-making. Yet beyond tactical brilliance, Alexander attuned himself to the human dimensions of conflict, the fear, anticipation, and determination that coursed through both allies and adversaries. Victory, he understood, depended not solely on strategy, but on psychology, timing, and the nuanced orchestration of countless individual actions within the grand design of battle. Even in the heart of battle, Alexander maintained moments of reflective awareness, a practice that separated him from ordinary commanders. Amidst the thunder of hooves, the clash of swords, and the cries of combatants, he considered the broader consequences of each decision, the lives endangered, the cities at stake, the potential for unrest or loyalty among the populations under his control. Each maneuver and countermaneuver was weighed not only for immediate advantage, but for its long-term impact on the army, the empire, and his personal vision. Triumph brought glory, but it also carried the weight of responsibility. Alexander's mind remained alert to both the tangible and the intangible, the rhythm of his troops, the subtle shifts in enemy morale, and the human cost inherent in every stroke of conquest. In these moments, the young king's leadership fused audacity with prudence, brilliance with empathy, and action with deep contemplation. In the midst of conflict, Alexander demonstrated an extraordinary ability to read both terrain and human behavior simultaneously. He observed the subtle movements of enemy formations, the fatigue and morale of his soldiers, and even the minor shifts in wind and light that could influence missile trajectories or cavalry charges. Decisions had to be made in seconds, each carrying profound consequences for thousands of lives. Whether to advance, flank, or hold position, he considered the immediate tactical benefit alongside the longer-term impact on army cohesion, civilian populations, and the political stability of conquered regions. His genius lay in this dual awareness, combining the immediacy of action with the reflective calculation of potential outcomes. The coordination of diverse units became a hallmark of Alexander's approach. Infantry, cavalry, and archers moved in intricate synchrony, responding fluidly to evolving circumstances, and the orders signaled through a combination of horns, banners, and messengers. He encouraged initiative among sub-commanders, trusting their judgment while ensuring they remained aligned with the overall strategy. Every maneuver, charge, and defensive formation was an interplay of precision, timing, and human insight. Even minor miscalculations could cascade into chaos. Yet Alexander's foresight and adaptability allowed his forces to exploit weaknesses in enemy lines, while maintaining cohesion and morale under immense pressure. Beyond tactics, Alexander confronted the emotional and ethical dimensions of warfare with acute awareness. He witnessed fear, courage, and desperation, not only among his own troops, but also in the ranks of the enemy. Each encounter forced him to consider the human consequences of his decisions, the loss of life, the displacement of populations, and the devastation of cities. These reflections tempered his actions and influenced his evolving approach to governance and diplomacy, guiding him toward a model of conquest that sought integration, stability, and cultural respect alongside military dominance. Through this lens, Alexander transformed the raw experience of battle into lessons for both leadership and empire building. In the midst of conflict, Alexander demonstrated an extraordinary ability to read both terrain and human behavior simultaneously. He scrutinized the subtle shifts in enemy formations, the way units reacted to orders, and the expressions of officers and soldiers alike. The smallest hesitation, the faintest ripple of uncertainty, could signal a weakness to exploit or a potential crisis to prevent. Decisions had to be made in mere seconds, yet their consequences would reverberate across the battlefield and beyond, affecting lives, morale, and the perception of his leadership. He considered not only the physical landscape, the hills, rivers, and open plains, but also the psychological terrain, assessing how fear, confidence, and anticipation could shape the actions of both his men and the enemy. His genius lay in seamlessly merging tactical immediacy with strategic foresight, balancing boldness with caution an instinct with careful calculation. The coordination of diverse units became a hallmark of Alexander's campaigns, reflecting both his tactical ingenuity and his deep understanding of human organization. Infantry, cavalry, archers, and specialized forces moved with intricate precision, adapting fluidly to the unfolding chaos of battle. He employed signals, prearranged maneuvers, and trusted officers to maintain cohesion across vast formations, ensuring that each unit could act decisively while remaining aligned with the overall strategy. Alexander encouraged initiative among sub-commanders, fostering a sense of responsibility and adaptability that allowed the army to respond effectively to unforeseen developments. Every movement, whether a rapid cavalry charge, a defensive infantry formation, or an archery volley, was carefully orchestrated, yet responsive to the shifting dynamics of the battlefield. Even minor miscalculations could cascade into disaster, yet his preparation, adaptability, and attention to human factors consistently turned potential vulnerabilities into opportunities for decisive advantage. Beyond tactics and maneuvering, Alexander grappled with the profound emotional and ethical dimensions of warfare. He bore witness to acts of courage and desperation, fear and resolve, among both his troops and the enemy. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him as he considered the human cost of each engagement, the lives lost, the destruction wrought upon cities, and the displacement of civilians. These reflections informed not only his immediate choices, but also his evolving approach to governance and diplomacy. Alexander recognized that enduring conquest required more than military domination. It demanded understanding, integration, and the careful blending of cultures. In this way, the chaos of battle became a classroom where lessons in leadership, empathy, and statecraft were learned, shaping an approach that combined strategic brilliance with a nuanced appreciation of human realities. Each victory for Alexander was never a conclusion in itself, but a stepping stone within a far larger design. While many commanders measured success only in terms of immediate conquest, he constantly looked ahead, considering how each captured city, subdued region, or defeated army could be woven into the broader fabric of his empire. The outcome of a battle was not just measured by the scattering of enemy troops, but by the potential for political consolidation, cultural integration, and the creation of a stable foundation for further expansion. In Asia Minor, for instance, after wresting control of cities that had long been under Persian rule, Alexander declared himself the liberator of the Greek Palaeus, presenting his conquest as a restoration rather than a subjugation. This was more than rhetoric. It was strategy, allowing him to secure loyalty without constant military presence. He understood that ruling over diverse peoples required more than force. It required legitimacy, a sense that the conqueror was not merely an invader, but a figure who could offer continuity, stability, and even prosperity. Thus, every clash of arms was accompanied by the quieter, subtler battle of persuasion, administration, and careful political calculation, a struggle that was as demanding as the one fought on the open field. When the dust of battle settled, Alexander was not only attentive to the disposition of cities and rulers, but also to the condition of the men who carried his empire forward on their shoulders. In the stillness of the campfires, after the din of combat had faded, he would walk among his soldiers, reading in their faces the unspoken burdens they carried, exhaustion etched in their expressions, the deep longing for home concealed in their silences, and the fleeting joys found in simple comforts such as shared songs or tales of their native lands. He understood that an army was not sustained by discipline alone, but by morale, and that morale was shaped as much by trust in their commander as by the promise of victory. Even the enemy, when observed closely, offered lessons. Alexander took note of how fear could unsettle a formation, how desperation could inspire ferocity, and how courage might burn brightest in the moments of inevitable defeat. To him, battle was a dialogue of human endurance and emotion, not simply the mechanical clash of formations. By listening to these unspoken voices, the sighs of weary soldiers, the tension in the opposing ranks, the quiet resilience in the eyes of the fallen, he refined his understanding of leadership, learning that the true art of command was grounded in empathy as much as in discipline. Yet beneath his composure and tactical brilliance, the weight of command pressed heavily upon him. Each engagement demanded decisions that would consign many of his men to death, and though victory often softened the immediate sting, the memory of lives lost could not easily be set aside. To lead was to carry an invisible burden, the knowledge that triumph was built upon sacrifice. Over time, Alexander began to see every battle as more than a test of arms. It was also a lesson in the limits of human ambition, the cost of greatness, and the responsibility inherent in power. He wrestled silently with these truths, even as outwardly he projected confidence and certainty. At the same time, he grew increasingly aware of the shadow of posterity, how his actions would be remembered, how his choices would shape not just his own destiny, but the very narrative of history. Conquest, he came to understand, was transient unless it was accompanied by vision, a plan for governance, for cultural blending, for the endurance of empire beyond the life of its maker. In this way, each battle became both a crucible of immediate decision and a meditation on the enduring legacy he sought to leave, binding together the fleeting moment of war with the timeless sweep of history. Alexander's battles, though fought with spears, swords, and cavalry charges, were always accompanied by a second, less visible campaign, the cultural and political integration of the conquered territories. He did not wish to be remembered merely as a destroyer, but as a builder of a new order that could endure long after the noise of war had faded. After each victory, he issued proclamations not of vengeance, but of continuity, often preserving local institutions and religious practices, and presenting himself as the rightful heir to the lands he now ruled. In Egypt, for example, he did not impose Greek customs upon the people, but embraced the role of pharaoh, participating in their sacred rituals and commissioning monuments that spoke to their traditions. This approach allowed him to transform conquest into legitimacy, turning former enemies into subjects who could see in him not only a foreign ruler, but a guardian of their own heritage. His genius was not only in breaking armies, but in stitching together the vast and diverse fabric of the ancient world into something resembling unity. Yet, the burden of this vision could not rest on his shoulders alone, and Alexander's relationship with his generals and companions became one of the most delicate and defining aspects of his leadership. Men such as Parmenion, Hephaestion, and later Seleucus and Ptolemy were not simply instruments of his will. They were independent minds with ambitions of their own, each with their followers, opinions, and rivalries. Alexander's camp was as much a battlefield of personalities as the plains of Issus or Gaugamela were theaters of war. He had to balance loyalty and discipline, rewarding those who served him faithfully, while tempering dissent and ambition that might fracture the unity of his army. These men, seasoned and ambitious, often reminded him that his dream of empire was not only his, but one that required constant negotiation, compromise, and at times stern displays of authority. It was in these moments of managing his closest companions that Alexander revealed another side of his genius, the ability to lead not only through command, but through persuasion, patience, and an unshakable sense of destiny that kept his circle bound to him even when doubts arose. Amid the victories, Alexander's gaze always extended beyond the immediate horizon, toward lands not yet seen, cultures not yet encountered, and possibilities not yet grasped. To him, empire was not static, but a living organism, one that had to grow or risk decay. The maps he carried in his mind reached far past the rivers he had crossed or the cities he had founded. Persia was not the end, nor was India. He dreamed of oceans that connected lands, of roads that linked distant peoples, of an empire so vast and interconnected that it would outlast any single dynasty. This relentless drive was both his greatest strength and his deepest peril, for it meant that contentment was a luxury he could never allow himself. Even as his men longed for rest, Alexander pressed forward, convinced that to pause was to invite decline. In his vision, every campaign was not merely a conquest, but a step toward something greater, an eternal legacy that would unite the known world under a single order. It was this vision, boundless and ceaseless, that defined his every decision and lent an almost dreamlike quality to his relentless pursuit of greatness. The military legacy of Alexander's campaigns is difficult to overstate. His combination of speed, coordination, and flexibility redefined how wars would be fought for centuries to come. The Macedonian phalanx, with its forest of long sarissas, had already been a formidable instrument under his father Philip, but under Alexander it became part of a larger symphony of arms. He wove together cavalry charges, light infantry maneuvers, and siegecraft with a precision that no opponent could match. The battles of Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela were not merely victories, but case studies in how to dismantle larger, often better supplied armies through superior strategy and unshakable discipline. These encounters echoed through military academies of later ages, from Rome to Napoleon, each seeking to capture a fragment of the brilliance that had allowed a relatively small kingdom to humble the greatest empire the world had yet known. The ripple effects of his campaigns stretched far beyond the battlefield. Each conquest redrew maps, shifted trade routes, and reshaped the delicate balance of power in the ancient world. Persia, once the center of political gravity, became a memory, its treasures redistributed, its satrapies reorganized under Macedonian control. The once isolated Greek city-states found themselves part of a larger imperial network, their culture now carried on the backs of soldiers, settlers, and merchants into lands they had barely imagined. The Near East, Egypt, and even parts of India were pulled into a single orbit, connected not just by conquest, but by infrastructure roads, cities, garrisons that secured Alexander's influence long after the dust of battle had settled. These changes marked the beginning of what historians now call the Hellenistic world, a vast, interwoven cultural and political space in which Greek and Eastern traditions met, clashed, and fused. Yet Alexander's military machine, for all its brilliance, was not eternal. The very ambition that had driven it forward also ensured its eventual fragmentation. His campaigns pushed men to their limits, carrying them across deserts, rivers, and mountains that strained not only their bodies but their loyalty. Each victory was also a demand for more, and each demand deepened the cracks that would later split the empire. After his death, the carefully built unity collapsed into a struggle among his generals, the Diadochi, who carved the empire into pieces even as they continued to employ the tactics and structures he had perfected. In this way, Alexander's military genius achieved both immortality and impermanence. His methods endured, inspiring generations, while his empire dissolved almost as soon as it had been created. What remained was the undeniable fact that no general before him had so thoroughly reshaped both the practice of war and the map of the known world. When Alexander entered Egypt in 332 BCE, the atmosphere was unlike anything he had encountered in Asia Minor or the Levant. There were no fortified walls bristling with defenders, no armies ready to risk everything for their cities. Instead, he was greeted almost as a messianic figure, a liberator who had arrived to restore order and dignity after decades of Persian domination. Egypt had endured heavy taxation, neglect of local temples, and interference in its religious and cultural traditions. The Persians were seen as distant and impersonal rulers, whose authority was maintained by fear and extraction rather than by consent. Alexander's arrival, in contrast, coincided with a sense of relief and hope. The locals embraced him with celebrations, offering gifts and homage. In Memphis, priests processed him through temples, and civic leaders publicly acknowledged his sovereignty. For once in his campaigns, victory did not require the clash of arms. And this unusual moment of peaceful transition profoundly impressed Alexander, teaching him the value of psychological and political acumen alongside military prowess. For the Greeks, Egypt had always represented both mystery and antiquity. Tales from travelers like Herodotus painted a land of immense antiquity, where knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine had been cultivated for millennia. To Alexander, whose education under Aristotle had instilled a reverence for wisdom and history, stepping onto Egyptian soil felt like entering a living museum, a place where civilization itself seemed to breathe through monuments and temples. The pyramids, older than the Greek cities he had known, towered over the landscape as silent testaments to human ambition and endurance. The Nile, in its regularity and vastness, spoke of a different kind of power, one measured not in victories on the battlefield, but in the management of life itself. Floods, irrigation, harvests, and cities that thrived in harmony with nature. Alexander, already ambitious for glory, saw in Egypt not only a new territory to govern, but a civilization whose majesty could reflect and even amplify his own emerging legend. The Egyptians, in turn, were masters of ritual and political symbolism, and they immediately recognized the opportunity to integrate Alexander into their religious framework. In Memphis, he was crowned as pharaoh in a ceremony designed to confer both political legitimacy and divine favor. For the Egyptians, a pharaoh was not merely a king. He was the intermediary between gods and humans, the living guarantor of Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth, justice, and balance. Alexander accepted this role, stepping into a sacred lineage that connected him directly to their pantheon and their ancient past. The coronation required him to participate in rituals and offerings that aligned him with the divine, cementing his authority in a way that no simple conquest could. This delicate negotiation between foreign conqueror and local religious expectation demonstrated Alexander's acute understanding of governance. To rule effectively over diverse peoples, one must navigate both power and belief, blending force with respect and diplomacy. Yet Alexander was never content with simply inheriting traditions. He sought to reshape them in ways that aligned with his broader vision of empire. His coronation as pharaoh was followed by the extraordinary journey into the Libyan desert to consult the oracle of Amun at Siwa. This pilgrimage was far more than a ceremonial excursion. It was a test of endurance, faith, and political acumen. Crossing the vast, arid expanses of desert, Alexander risked not only the harsh elements, but the uncertainty of his own status among men and gods. Ancient sources recount that he traveled with only a small retinue, guided by priests and interpreters, and that the harsh desert tested his men as much as their leader. The isolation of the oasis, far from his army and supply lines, created a profound opportunity for reflection, allowing Alexander to confront both his ambitions and the weight of the destiny he had been pursuing relentlessly. When Alexander finally arrived at the oracle, he was met with the solemn rituals of the Siwan priests. The exact details of the consultation remained shrouded in mystery, but the message was clear. He was to be recognized as son of Amun. For Alexander, whose identity had already been intertwined with divine ambition since his youth, this affirmation carried profound significance. It reinforced his sense of purpose, his belief in a destiny sanctioned by higher powers. For the Egyptians, it elevated him to a figure who could legitimately rule as pharaoh, a living bridge between their gods and the mortal world. For his Macedonian companions, it reinforced the aura of inevitability surrounding their commander, making it easier to accept his authority as both commander and, in a symbolic sense, semi-divine leader. This blending of religious and political strategy exemplified Alexander's unique approach to conquest. In Persia, he had relied primarily on military might. In Egypt, he demonstrated that rulership required subtlety, symbolism, and careful negotiation with the cultures he absorbed. By embracing Egyptian religion and customs, Alexander was not merely placating a conquered people. He was demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of empire building. This approach allowed him to consolidate control quickly and peacefully, ensuring loyalty while simultaneously enhancing his own legend. Egypt became both a laboratory for governance and a stage for Alexander's personal and political transformation, a place where military triumph, religious symbolism, and cultural sensitivity intersected to shape his identity as a ruler whose ambitions extended far beyond simple territorial conquest. Returning from Siwa, Alexander began planning one of his most enduring projects, the founding of a new city on the Mediterranean coast. His choice fell upon a site west of the Nile Delta, near the small fishing village of Rhakotis, strategically positioned between the river and the sea. This location offered immediate access to both inland trade via the Nile and maritime routes across the Mediterranean, ensuring the city's economic and strategic potential. Alexander oversaw the initial planning personally, sketching the city's layout with the precision of a master architect and the foresight of a ruler who understood the importance of urban design in consolidating power. Wide streets, orderly grids, and open squares were planned not only for functionality, but to project an image of harmony and order, a physical manifestation of the political and cultural unity he envisioned. Alexandria, however, was meant to be more than a military outpost or trade hub. It was conceived as a cultural beacon. Alexander imagined it as a place where Greek and Egyptian traditions could meet, coexist, and flourish. Hellenistic architecture would dominate public buildings, theaters, and temples, while Egyptian religious and social customs would be respected and integrated. By designing the city to blend these traditions, Alexander aimed to create a space that symbolized the broader vision of his empire, a world united under Greek influence yet enriched by local cultures. In this way, Alexandria became a prototype for the kind of cosmopolitan centers he would later foster throughout his territories, offering a template for cultural synthesis that would resonate long after his death. The symbolic significance of Alexandria extended beyond practicality. By founding a city that bore his name, Alexander ensured that his legacy would endure, not only through stories of battles and conquests, but through a tangible living monument. While many of his military victories would be ephemeral, subject to reversal or decay, Alexandria represented permanence. The city's location on the Nile Delta, with fertile lands, a deep harbor, and access to trade networks, guaranteed that it would prosper for centuries. Moreover, Alexander's personal involvement in its founding reinforced the message to his soldiers, administrators, and the local population. This was a ruler with vision, capable of shaping the world, both on the battlefield and through lasting infrastructure that intertwined politics, culture, and commerce. For his army, Egypt provided a much-needed reprieve after years of relentless campaigning. The soldiers, accustomed to long marches, sieges, and continuous conflict, found in the Nile Valley a place of abundance and relative security. They could recover physically, rest, and resupply, but the psychological benefits were equally significant. Witnessing Alexander's careful integration into Egyptian society, his coronation as pharaoh, his pilgrimage to Siwa, and his respectful engagement with local customs reinforced their confidence in his leadership. Soldiers saw that their king was not merely a battlefield strategist, but a ruler capable of unifying peoples, managing complex territories, and securing prosperity without constant bloodshed. This pause strengthened the cohesion of the army, preparing them for the formidable challenges that awaited in Mesopotamia and beyond. The conquest of Egypt also highlighted Alexander's extraordinary adaptability as a leader. In Persia, his power had been projected primarily through force. In Egypt, he demonstrated that effective rule required diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and symbolic authority. By embracing Egyptian gods, participating in rituals, and respecting centuries-old traditions, he gained not only political legitimacy, but also moral authority in the eyes of the populace. This approach allowed him to establish control quickly and peacefully, avoiding the need for violent subjugation. The experience also served as a formative lesson for future campaigns, illustrating that conquest alone could not sustain an empire. Effective governance required understanding and integrating the diverse cultures of the lands he sought to rule. Although Alexander spent only a short period in Egypt, less than a year, the consequences of his stay are disproportionately significant. The coronation, the visit to the oracle, and the founding of Alexandria established enduring patterns of authority and cultural integration that would define his empire. In the minds of many Egyptians, Alexander was not just a passing conqueror. He was a legitimate pharaoh, a bridge between the divine and mortal realms, and the founder of a city destined to become a center of knowledge, trade, and cultural exchange. These accomplishments demonstrated that Alexander's genius was not confined to the battlefield. He possessed the vision to build civilizations, leaving structures, cities, and institutions that would outlast his own lifetime. In the grand arc of Alexander's campaigns, Egypt represented both a pause and a transformation. While the region offered respite from constant warfare, it also demanded that he refine his approach to leadership, blending force with diplomacy and ambition with respect for ancient traditions. His time among the Nile's fertile lands revealed a new dimension of power, the ability to inspire loyalty not through fear alone, but through legitimacy, ritual, and vision. Egypt became a mirror in which Alexander could see the full scope of his potential, not just as a conqueror of lands, but as a shaper of societies and cultures, a figure whose influence could extend beyond his immediate victories. Leaving Egypt, Alexander did not merely abandon a conquered territory. He departed, leaving foundations that would endure for centuries. Alexandria, with its strategic harbor, wide avenues, and carefully planned urban design, embodied his aspirations for a cosmopolitan center where Greek and Egyptian traditions intertwined. It would attract scholars, merchants, and artists from across the Mediterranean and beyond, becoming a hub of learning, trade, and cultural exchange. The city's planned longevity and symbolic resonance ensured that Alexander's presence in Egypt would persist long after his campaigns moved eastward. In this sense, Egypt was not just a stepping stone in his military ambitions. It was a proving ground for his ability to create lasting, tangible legacies. As he turned toward Mesopotamia, in the heart of the Persian Empire, Alexander carried with him lessons learned in Egypt, the value of cultural integration, the importance of symbolism in consolidating power, and the enduring impact of cities as instruments of influence. Egypt had welcomed him, transformed his perception of leadership, and provided the stage where his ambition could merge with history, religion, and architecture. In the Nile Valley, Alexander had not only secured a kingdom, but had planted the seeds of his enduring legend. With the pyramids behind him and the foundations of Alexandria established, he marched onward, carrying the dual weight of divine favor and worldly vision, prepared to confront the next great chapter of his extraordinary life. As Alexander's campaigns moved further east, his attention increasingly turned to the creation of lasting legacies beyond mere military conquest. He had already witnessed how quickly territories could be captured and armies defeated, yet he understood that true authority required more than victories on the battlefield. Conquests alone could secure lands temporarily, but the durability of an empire depended on the integration of culture, infrastructure, and governance. From Egypt to Mesopotamia, Alexander envisioned urban centers that would not only serve as administrative hubs, but also as living symbols of the blending of Greek and local traditions. Each city was designed with foresight, taking into account its strategic location, economic potential, and cultural significance, creating spaces where commerce, scholarship, and civic life could thrive in harmony with the overarching framework of his empire. One of the most remarkable aspects of Alexander's urban planning was his meticulous attention to geography, resources, and logistics. Cities were rarely chosen at random. Instead, he considered access to rivers, proximity to trade routes, defensive advantages, and the surrounding agricultural lands that could sustain growing populations. Alexandria, founded at the mouth of the Nile, exemplified this approach perfectly. Its broad harbor allowed ships from across the Mediterranean to dock safely, while the fertile lands nearby ensured abundant food supply. This careful attention to natural and economic factors demonstrated Alexander's ability to combine strategic military thinking with practical urban planning, ensuring that each city could function as a sustainable center of power, commerce, and culture long after his departure. The design of these cities also carried profound symbolic meaning, reflecting Alexander's desire to create order, harmony, and cohesion across his empire. Streets were laid out in straight grids, public squares emphasized communal life, and temples and administrative buildings incorporated elements of both Greek and local architectural styles. These urban landscapes were more than functional. They were statements of authority and vision. Citizens moving through the orderly streets would experience a sense of balance and stability, while the fusion of cultural elements subtly reinforced Alexander's ideals of unity and inclusivity. Through city planning, he conveyed the same principles of strategy and control that guided his military campaigns, demonstrating that governance could be expressed not only through laws and armies, but also through the very spaces in which people lived, worked, and interacted. Alexander's cities were not merely administrative or military hubs. They were designed to be vibrant centers of cultural and intellectual life. Markets bustled with goods brought from across the empire, spices from India, silks from Central Asia, metals and crafts from the Mediterranean, creating spaces where economic exchange became inseparable from cultural interaction. Beyond commerce, these cities attracted scholars, artisans, and philosophers whose presence encouraged the circulation of knowledge and artistic techniques. In this way, Alexander's urban foundations were not only practical instruments of governance, but also incubators of cultural fusion, spaces where Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and local traditions could merge, adapt, and evolve into something new and enduring. While Greek culture provided the backbone of these cities, Alexander carefully ensured that local customs, religious practices, and governance structures were respected. In Egypt, temples continued their traditional functions, even as Greek architectural styles and civic institutions were introduced. In Mesopotamia, local bureaucracies remained intact while being augmented with Macedonian oversight and Greek civic practices. By integrating rather than suppressing local traditions, Alexander minimized resistance and fostered cooperation, demonstrating his acute understanding that the success of an empire depended not just on conquest, but on the willing participation of the people. These policies allowed the cities to thrive culturally and economically, laying the foundation for stability across his diverse territories. The strategic placement of Alexander's cities also reflected his long-term military vision. Each urban center acted as a node in a network that enabled rapid communication, troop movement, and supply management across vast distances. Garrisons stationed within the cities maintained security, while roads connecting them facilitated the mobility of armies and officials. Yet Alexander never reduced these settlements to mere fortresses. They were designed for livability, encouraging civilian settlement and trade alongside military readiness. In this, his urban strategy demonstrated a remarkable foresight, blending military efficiency with economic vitality and cultural development, ensuring that the influence of his empire would extend far beyond the reach of his immediate campaigns. Through these cities, Alexander's vision of empire became tangible, visible not only in walls and streets, but in the daily lives of their inhabitants. Greek language, arts, and philosophy coexisted alongside local customs, creating an environment where multiple traditions could intersect and enrich one another. The intentional blending of cultures fostered innovation, whether in architecture, urban planning, or intellectual pursuits. Residents experienced a microcosm of Alexander's broader vision, a world connected through trade, knowledge, and governance, yet respectful of local identities. Each city acted as a living example of how conquest could evolve into collaboration, and how cultural exchange could be both strategic and enriching. Intellectual life flourished within these foundations, reflecting Alexander's understanding of knowledge as a source of power and influence. Libraries, schools, and lecture halls attracted scholars from across the known world, encouraging the circulation of ideas that would influence science, philosophy, and administration for generations. Alexandria in Egypt, in particular, would later house the Great Library, becoming a symbol of learning for centuries to come. Alexander recognized that culture and education were tools of legacy. While armies might conquer lands temporarily, the ideas nurtured in these cities could endure indefinitely, shaping societies long after he himself had passed. Alexander's approach to cultural integration was not without its challenges. Diverse populations sometimes resisted Greek customs or Macedonian authority, and balancing the expectations of local elites with those of Greek settlers required careful diplomacy. However, his strategy of blending traditions rather than imposing them outright allowed for more sustainable governance. Local leaders were incorporated into administrative roles. Marriages between Macedonians and native families were encouraged, and religious practices were respected. This delicate balance reduced the likelihood of rebellion and fostered loyalty, demonstrating that the resilience of an empire depended on understanding, cooperation, and a vision that went beyond simple domination. Even ordinary daily life in Alexander's cities reflected his influence and vision. Markets teemed with traders from distant lands. Artisans experimented with combined Greek and local techniques, and theaters and stadiums introduced Greek cultural practices alongside traditional festivals. Soldiers trained local recruits in military tactics, creating a class of defenders loyal not only to Alexander, but to the principles of his campaigns. This daily interweaving of cultures ensured that his legacy was embedded not just in monuments or decrees, but in the rhythms of everyday existence, shaping societies organically and subtly, far beyond the reach of immediate conquest. The naming of these cities often carried symbolic and psychological weight. Many bore his name Alexandria, serving as both a literal and figurative imprint of his presence across the empire. This naming strategy reinforced cohesion, projecting authority and continuity over vast distances. Each Alexandria became a recognizable node within his network of settlements, linking regions culturally, economically, and administratively. Beyond mere labels, these cities stood as declarations of identity and vision, signaling to inhabitants and travelers alike that Alexander's influence extended everywhere, tangible in stone, street, and institution. Alexander's city building and cultural policies also strengthened the administrative backbone of his empire. The cities produced trained officials, scholars, and soldiers who could be dispatched wherever needed, spreading his systems of governance and education. By cultivating capable personnel in each settlement, he ensured that his ideals and practices could be implemented consistently across diverse regions. This foresight allowed him to maintain control over a vast and heterogeneous empire and created a template for governance that combined military, administrative, and cultural strategy, a model that would influence future empires long after his lifetime. Through his deliberate urban and cultural policies, Alexander transformed conquered territories into more than just extensions of his military reach. Each city became a living testament to his vision, spaces where governance, commerce, learning, and culture intersected. By blending Greek traditions with local customs, he created environments that encouraged stability, loyalty, and innovation. These cities were not temporary military outposts, but enduring centers of human activity, designed to thrive socially, economically, and culturally for generations. By the time Alexander pressed further into the easternmost regions of his empire, the pattern of founding cities and fostering cultural integration had become central to his leadership. Each urban foundation whether on the Nile, in Mesopotamia, or in Persia, served as a node linking diverse regions, promoting trade, communication, and shared governance. These cities embodied the principles of his vision. They were ordered, cosmopolitan, and inclusive, capable of surviving the departure of their founder while retaining the essence of his ideals. Through them, Alexander ensured that the influence of his empire would endure even as political boundaries shifted. Ultimately, Alexander's city-building strategy demonstrated that his genius extended far beyond the battlefield. While his military victories secured lands, his cultural and administrative innovations ensured that his empire left a lasting imprint on the world. Alexandria in Egypt, alongside other foundations, would become enduring centers of trade, scholarship, and cross-cultural exchange. Through these carefully planned cities, Alexander transformed conquest into creation, leaving a tangible, living legacy that would outlast the boundaries of his empire, the lives of his soldiers, and even the memory of individual battles. In this way, his influence became eternal, a testament to the power of vision, strategy, and the blending of cultures across vast civilizations. Centuries after Alexander's campaigns, historians, storytellers, and chroniclers began piecing together the life of a young king who had once dreamed of the world as a single stage. These accounts were shaped not only by the events themselves, but by the lenses through which later generations interpreted them. Greek historians often emphasized his brilliance, courage, and almost mythic heroism, while Persian sources highlighted the disruption he brought to long-established traditions and the audacity of his campaigns. Roman writers, writing centuries later, sometimes used his life as a moral lesson, framing his ambition and successes in ways that reflected their own cultural and political values. Yet beneath these layers of interpretation, the essence of Alexander endured, a man driven by vision, curiosity, and an insatiable desire to push boundaries beyond the ordinary. From the earliest biographies to epic poems, Alexander's memory became a canvas upon which societies projected their ideals, fears, and aspirations. In each retelling, his accomplishments were magnified, his character mythologized, and his failures interpreted to suit contemporary narratives. Sculptors carved his visage into stone. Painters depicted him charging across vast battlefields, horse and armor gleaming in imagined sunlight. And coins bearing his likeness circulated throughout the Mediterranean and Near East. These tangible artifacts ensured that even centuries later, people could engage with the man he had been, even if the precise details of his life were blurred by legend and interpretation. Each depiction reinforced certain qualities while softening others, creating a composite image that balanced historical reality with collective imagination. Alexander's legend was further shaped by the testimonies of his companions and generals, whose writings preserved fragments of his life and decisions. Figures such as Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Hephaestion recorded not only military events, but personal observations, offering glimpses of his temperament, curiosity, and moments of doubt. These accounts humanized a figure who might otherwise seem larger than life, revealing the intricate interplay between personal ambition, leadership, and relational bonds. Through their eyes, audiences learned that Alexander was not simply a conquering hero. He was a man capable of reflection, vulnerability, and deep loyalty, making the legend richer and more multidimensional while grounding it in human experience. Alexander's enduring fascination lies in his contradictions, which made him both compelling and elusive to later generations. He was brilliant yet impulsive, generous yet exacting, visionary yet at times impatient. Scholars and storytellers across centuries grappled with these dualities, attempting to reconcile the image of a man capable of great cruelty with that of a leader who respected local customs and promoted cultural blending. These contradictions fueled the mythos surrounding him, making Alexander not only a subject of admiration, but also a lens through which societies could examine ambition, morality, and the human condition. His life became a narrative playground where both awe and caution could coexist. Even within the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged after his death, Alexander's memory continued to shape political and cultural identity. His generals divided the vast territories he had conquered, yet many claimed to act in his spirit, legitimizing their authority through association with his name. Cities continued to bear his title, and institutions he had founded persisted, carrying forward the administrative and cultural frameworks he had implemented. Through these mechanisms, his influence extended far beyond his own lifetime, shaping governance, culture, and intellectual life in ways that reinforced his enduring presence in the collective imagination of successive generations. Writings from antiquity often emphasize divine or heroic elements in Alexander's story. Tales of the oracle at Siwa, claims of descent from Achilles or Zeus, and accounts of his battlefield invincibility contributed to an aura of inevitability and grandeur. While these narratives sometimes exaggerated historical reality, they also reveal how societies conceptualize exceptional individuals as beings whose actions and lives operate at the intersection of human possibility and divine influence. Through myth-making, cultures not only celebrated Alexander's achievements, but also explored their own ideals, fears, and aspirations, using his story as a mirror for contemplation and moral reflection. Artists across centuries engaged deeply with Alexander's legacy, translating his life into visual forms that reflected both his accomplishments and the cultural priorities of their own times. From frescoes and mosaics to statues and illuminated manuscripts, each representation emphasized different aspects of his character. In some, he appeared as a youthful, almost ethereal conqueror. In others, as a stoic, commanding ruler. And in yet others, a reflective figure contemplating the fleeting nature of power. These evolving artistic interpretations reveal not only changing aesthetic preferences, but also the ways in which Alexander's story was reshaped to provide inspiration, moral lessons, or entertainment for audiences across generations. Literature further preserved and amplified his memory, as poets, dramatists, and chroniclers explored the human dimensions of his story. They delved into questions of fate, ambition, morality, and the costs of greatness, turning his campaigns and personal choices into narratives that transcended time. In epic poetry, he became a symbol of heroic aspiration. In historical narratives, a cautionary tale of ambition's consequences. Through literature, Alexander's life became a lens for reflecting on universal human experiences, leadership, courage, hubris, and the balance between personal desire and societal responsibility. Even in modern times, Alexander continues to captivate scholars, artists, and the general public alike. Archaeologists uncover cities, artifacts, and inscriptions that shed light on his campaigns and the societies he influenced. Historians study his strategies in governance, striving to separate myth from fact. Popular culture revisits his story in novels, films, and documentaries, often emphasizing drama and spectacle, yet still engaging with the fundamental qualities that defined him: courage, intelligence, curiosity, and relentless vision. Through these diverse forms of remembrance, Alexander's legacy remains vibrant, allowing contemporary audiences to explore both the historical and symbolic dimensions of his life. Through monuments, written records, and the enduring foundations of cities, Alexander's influence persists quietly in the structures, cultural practices, and institutions of the ancient world. His methods of leadership, integration of diverse peoples, and approach to governance offer lessons that transcend time. By studying the echoes of his life, modern audiences can gain insight not only into historical events, but also into broader human challenges. How to balance authority with responsibility, ambition with empathy, and vision with practical execution. In this way, Alexander's legacy serves as both historical record and guide to understanding human potential and limitation. The human dimensions of his memory also resonate deeply. Tales of friendships, such as his bond with Hephaestion and the loyalty of his soldiers, remind us that behind the legend was a man capable of profound emotion, reflection, and personal connection. These narratives offer a counterpoint to the grand scale of his campaigns, illustrating that even extraordinary figures experience doubt, grief, and the weight of expectations. Such insights make Alexander accessible across centuries, allowing readers and historians to connect with his humanity amidst the grandeur of his achievements. Alexander's memory interacts with broader notions of time, legacy, and cultural transmission. While empires rise and fall, and cities are rebuilt or abandoned, the narrative of his life has been continuously retold, reconstructed for each generation. Every retelling reshapes the past to provide meaning for the present, demonstrating that history is not static, but a dialogue between memory and interpretation. In this way, Alexander exists both in tangible history and in the collective imagination, bridging fact and legend and offering enduring lessons about ambition, leadership, and the human condition. Ultimately, Alexander's legend is as instructive as his historical actions. By examining how his memory was preserved, adapted, and transmitted across cultures and centuries, we learn not only about the man himself, but also about the societies that revered, critiqued, and mythologized him. The interplay between history and memory illuminates how cultures construct meaning, celebrate heroism, and grapple with the complexities of leadership and ambition. Each generation reshapes his story, highlighting qualities that resonate with contemporary values while leaving others in shadow. Through all these layers, historiography, literature, art, and cultural transmission, Alexander remains a figure who compels reflection. His life and its retelling demonstrate the enduring fascination with human ambition, creativity, and the pursuit of greatness. Each account, whether factual or embellished, contributes to a composite portrait that is both inspiring and cautionary, reminding us that history is both lived and remembered, and that memory shapes how the past continues to speak to the present. Even now, the echoes of Alexander's life continue to inform modern scholarship, leadership studies, and cultural exploration. Students, historians, and casual readers alike study his campaigns, strategies, and administrative innovations, seeking insights into human decision-making, resilience, and vision. His legacy, preserved through cities, artifacts, writings, and collective memory, remains a bridge connecting past and present, inviting reflection on the possibilities and limitations inherent in human ambition. In this way, the story of Alexander the Great endures, quietly guiding, inspiring, and challenging those willing to listen and learn. In a modern city, a student sits quietly in a sunlit library, tracing the ancient roots of a king whose ambition once spanned continents. Maps, chronicles, and digital reconstructions lie open before them, each line and note a whisper from the past. The campaigns of Alexander the Great, though centuries removed, are suddenly intimate, as if the young king's footsteps echo softly through streets and mountains still visible in the imagination. The student contemplates not only battles and victories, but the human dimensions of leadership, curiosity, and vision that allowed one man to leave such a profound mark on the world. Each campaign becomes more than a historical event. It is a story of human potential, decision-making, and the quiet moments of reflection that shaped monumental actions. Libraries and archives hold scrolls, manuscripts, and inscriptions that preserve fragments of Alexander's life, from tactical orders to personal observations. Scholars study these materials carefully, weighing evidence and interpretation, connecting tangible artifacts to the stories transmitted across generations. Each source, whether a detailed report of a battle, a philosophical reflection inspired by his mentor Aristotle, or a poetic retelling of his journeys, contributes to a fuller understanding of his world. In these quiet, meticulous studies, the boundaries between past and present blur, revealing the depth of human endeavor and the enduring power of memory to connect us to lives lived long ago. Modern leadership studies continue to draw inspiration from Alexander's strategies, vision, and adaptability. His ability to unite diverse peoples under a common purpose, motivate soldiers and administrators alike, and navigate unforeseen challenges offers insights that remain relevant even in contemporary contexts. By examining his decisions with care, scholars and students reflect on the delicate balance between ambition and prudence, courage and foresight. His life illustrates that effective leadership requires not only intelligence and boldness, but also attentiveness, empathy, and an understanding of human nature, lessons that transcend time and continue to guide those who seek to lead with both vision and integrity. Even the ordinary moments of Alexander's life continue to resonate in modern reflection. His curiosity about foreign cultures, his engagement with scholars, and his attentiveness to the daily lives of his soldiers illustrate that leadership extends far beyond the battlefield. Small decisions, how to allocate resources, how to communicate with local populations, how to mentor young officers revealed a meticulous mind attuned to both strategy and human dynamics. These quiet facets of his life remind us that enduring influence is built not only on grand gestures, but also on consistent attention to detail and empathy for those who follow. Artists and storytellers continue to reinterpret Alexander's life through novels, films, paintings, and digital media, translating ancient campaigns into narratives accessible to contemporary audiences. Each adaptation, while often dramatized, preserves the essence of his character: intelligence, courage, ambition, and curiosity. These creative interpretations bridge centuries, allowing modern audiences to engage with historical events in emotionally resonant ways. The stories emphasize timeless human themes: friendship, loyalty, leadership, and ethical complexity, keeping Alexander's memory alive as both inspiration and subject of contemplation. Alexander's cities, many of which endured long after his death, provide tangible lessons in cultural integration, governance, and urban planning. Alexandria in Egypt, with its libraries, harbors, and marketplaces, became a hub of learning, commerce, and cross-cultural exchange. Each city he founded acted as a living laboratory, blending Greek administrative structures with local customs, creating societies that were dynamic, resilient, and adaptable. These urban legacies remind us that visionary leadership extends beyond conquest, shaping the rhythms of everyday life and leaving lasting marks on culture, economy, and social structure. Historians also examine the ethical dimensions of Alexander's campaigns, considering the human cost alongside his achievements. While his ambition led to remarkable accomplishments, it also resulted in destruction, displacement, and hardship for countless people. Modern study of these consequences encourage reflection on the responsibilities of leadership and the moral complexities inherent in pursuing great vision. By understanding both the triumphs and the suffering associated with his campaigns, contemporary audiences gain a nuanced perspective on the interplay between ambition, power, and ethical responsibility. In classrooms around the world, Alexander's life serves as a rich subject for study and debate. Students analyze his strategies, political policies, and personal choices, considering the broader impact on societies, cultures, and governance. Discussions often explore the tension between personal ambition and collective welfare, the role of leadership in shaping human destiny, and the ways in which memory and myth influence our understanding of historical figures. Through these educational explorations, Alexander's story continues to provide lessons that extend far beyond the events of his own lifetime. The fascination with Alexander also stems from his embodiment of human curiosity and exploration. His desire to learn about foreign lands, engage with scholars, and understand diverse cultures reflects a timeless human drive to seek knowledge and expand horizons. This intellectual curiosity complements his military and political achievements, reminding modern audiences that exploration, whether of the world or of human potential, requires imagination, courage, and openness to new experiences. In this way, Alexander's life continues to inspire curiosity and reflection across centuries. Archaeological discoveries continue to illuminate Alexander's campaigns and the societies he encountered. Excavated cities, battle sites, fortifications, and artifacts provide tangible evidence of his strategies, governance, and interactions with diverse populations. These findings complement textual sources, revealing the practical realities of empire building, the logistics of long-distance campaigns, and the ways in which conquered communities adapted to new political and cultural structures. Through these material traces, modern audiences gain a richer, multidimensional understanding of Alexander's world. Even in philosophical and ethical discourse, Alexander's life remains a point of reference. His choices, from tactical decisions on the battlefield to cultural policies in newly conquered territories, provoke reflection on ambition, morality, leadership, and legacy. Scholars debate the balance he struck or failed to strike between personal aspiration and collective welfare, and use his example to explore enduring questions about power, responsibility, and human potential. In this sense, Alexander serves as both historical subject and timeless ethical case study. His influence extends into modern geopolitics and cross-cultural studies, providing historical perspective on the integration of diverse peoples under a single authority. Alexander's approach respecting local customs while introducing administrative innovations offers lessons in diplomacy, negotiation, and cultural adaptability. These principles continue to inform contemporary discussions about governance, international relations, and the management of multicultural societies, demonstrating that the relevance of his life extends far beyond the events of his own era. At a personal level, reflections on Alexander invite contemplation of human potential and limitation. His extraordinary feats demonstrate what courage, vision, and perseverance can achieve, while the challenges he faced, rebellions, logistical crisis, and personal loss, highlight the constraints inherent in even the most ambitious endeavors. By studying his life, modern observers gain insight into the delicate balance between aspiration and realism, and the ways in which human resilience interacts with circumstance, opportunity, and consequence. In quiet moments, one might imagine Alexander's presence in the landscapes he once traversed, the rivers, plains, and cities that bore witness to his campaigns. These silent echoes of the past connect the modern world to ancient experiences, allowing us to sense the continuity of human effort, the persistence of memory, and the enduring impact of visionary leadership. Even centuries later, the very ground he walked, the cities he founded, and the decisions he made continue to resonate, offering a subtle yet profound reminder of our connection to history. Ultimately, Alexander's story illustrates that history is not simply a record of events, but a living dialogue between past and present. The echoes of his life, preserved in texts, artifacts, monuments, and collective memory, continue to engage those who seek to understand ambition, culture, leadership, and the human condition. By listening to these echoes, we are invited to reflect on our own choices, capacities, and responsibilities, connecting with the timeless human quest to explore, understand, and shape the world in ways both grand and intimate. And so, dear listener, our journey through the life of Alexander the Great comes to a gentle close. We have wandered through rolling hills, bustling cities, and distant plains, following the footsteps of a man whose vision once stretched across continents. In these quiet moments together, we have explored not only battles and empires, but the subtle rhythms of life, leadership, and human ambition that shaped his world. Let the story settle softly, like the final embers of a fire fading into night. If you have been lulled toward dreams by these whispers of history, that is exactly how it should be. The past, after all, is not only a series of events to be memorized, but a companion, a reflection, and a source of gentle inspiration for the present moment. As you rest, consider the lessons Alexander's life leaves behind: courage tempered by reflection, ambition balanced with awareness of consequence, curiosity that spans cultures, and the quiet strength found in patience and observation. These echoes of his experience continue to resonate, quietly informing our understanding of leadership, human potential, and the enduring connections between people and history. Even as the world moves forward, the cities he founded, the stories he inspired, and the traces of his campaigns continue to whisper across time. By listening to these echoes, we are reminded that each of us, in small or grand ways, participates in the shaping of history, in the building of culture, and in the continuation of human curiosity and resilience. So now, take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and allow the stillness to fill you. Let the story of Alexander linger gently, not as a spectacle of conquest, but as a quiet companion guiding reflection, imagination, and contemplation. And when you are ready, you may return to the world outside, carrying with you the subtle whispers of a life lived with vision, courage, and curiosity. The past will remain, patiently waiting for the next journey, the next quiet exploration, and the next evening spent with history as your companion. If you wish, I invite you to join me again another night, for another gentle journey into the lives of those who have shaped our world, listening quietly, reflecting deeply, and dreaming alongside the stories that continue to connect us across time.